Last night, when Mark and I spoke on the telephone, he said very kindly, I got hold of some PowerPoint slides for you to show, but of course, like many audiovisual aids, all the whistles and bells may be there in theory, but unfortunately the whistles aren't whistling and the bells aren't ringing. So you just have to listen to what I'm going to be saying to you as opposed to anything else. Essentially what I've got to talk about then are really what I think were 6 possible drawbacks. But let me say first of all that these drawbacks are purely hypothetical ones. None of them were actually raised in any student feedback. The student feedback was universally full of praise, in fact almost embarrassingly full of praise, it seemed to me. Nobody was negative about the course. They praised both the delivery of it, the way we'd done it, the general sense in which they developed through the course as well. So what we've done is to try to make up some kind of criticism first of all, and I've tried to number these under first of all 6 headings. I can't show them to you because the system doesn't work, but at least you have to just listen to what I'm going to say. The first possibility is that you could argue that many students will go on to an LPC or BVC course where they'll encounter these skills in a different and professional capacity. Well, that is an argument, I suppose you could say. Why do that at university level? But in fact, other things like criminal evidence courses are also offered at universities, and they're done later on in an LPC and BVC course anyway. So why not do some of the advocacy skills and the kind of interviewing skills? Why not introduce these at this point anyway? Not everybody, of course, goes on to an LPC course or a BVC course. So for those who don't go on, this is perhaps their only exposure to such a course anyway, and therefore they're getting a benefit which they would not have later on should they go on to these higher courses. Somewhat contentiously, and I think one speaks feelingly here, one could argue that the skills, second point, the skills that we're looking at here are not really academic in terms of an LLB course. Well, we are going to be very shortly sitting in a building together. As Marcus said, he's a bit schizophrenic. He's half of us. Half of him is actually in an academic research-based department, and half of it is in a practitioner skills-based course. But as of September, whatever, we're going to be in the same building, and he's going to be actually doing both of these things together. So are skills really part of what an academic LLB should be about? Now that's a very wide question, obviously, and we would contend that clearly it is. We deal with writing skills unashamedly, and what we're doing here, obviously, is not a writing skills course, but one which is concerned with oral skills, either presentation and persuasively trying to argue a case, or secondly, we're trying to look at people eliciting information from an oral presentation. As I say, the client comes along, they have a little bit of information, as you can see, to begin with, but it's up to them to draw out as much as possible from careful listening skills and then questioning people as to what actually is going on. So these are oral, both OR and AU oral skills. Thirdly, could it be said that the course demands too high a degree of staff allocation and commitment? Well, certainly both of us, as Mark has said, have got some experience in practice, and so it's perhaps helpful to have people who've got some practitioner experience. But the actual student-teacher ratio, I reckon, is something like 15 or 18 to 1, so it's not bad at all in terms of that, looking at it in that sense. We're looking at a 3-hour slot per week, not having, as I say, a 1-hour lecture followed by a couple of seminars and things of that kind. So, yes, of course, you haven't got 70 people wedged into a lecture, but you've got pretty good ratios in terms of student numbers and, as I say, the teacher contact. In terms of other resources, well, it's no more expensive than any other course at all. We don't have any particular need for expensive journals. We don't have any other materials that people have to use. We didn't actually even say to students, you've got to go and buy a textbook, because we were really giving them all the materials that they required in the process of the actual module itself. Fourthly, if I have not mismade my numbering, the course might be said not to be sufficiently rigorous or theoretical when taught at this level. Again, I would refute that, and I mean these are slightly armed salads, I have to say. I'm putting them up and then knocking them down again, but nonetheless, if we say, is it something that should be done at this point? Skills are dealt with clearly at a BVC or LPC level, but Mark and I have both obviously seen what happens in these courses. I've been involved in advocacy work as well. Mark teaches advocacy. I think we're actually head of advocacy down at the Institute of Legal Practice. And so what we're doing is not actually a watered down version of what's happening there. It is the same kind of thing. Some of us, they will get another dose of it later on, but then skills are things that you have to keep in practice, obviously. When you're shown how to ride a bicycle, yes, you can do it again later on, but if you haven't ridden a bike for a while, it takes a certain degree of time to learn how to do it once more. But at least once you've done it, you know you can do it, and therefore the skill comes back quite quickly. Now, in terms, as I say, of what we're doing, therefore, there's no question about the thing being a rigorous course. We're not there simply just telling war stories about what we've all done in practice and how wonderful it all was in those days. But we're trying to make the whole thing a serious piece of educational development as we go through the whole thing. And moreover, actually, we are not sort of putting into it loads of theory. We don't try to talk about this as a theory-rich course. It's developed very much from how we show people what we're doing and then saying, now you go ahead and practice. We're not, as I say, Mark mentions Lucressa, we do that, but we don't actually, as I say, try to model it on any particular hypothetical view. Another objection, perhaps, is that the course was too enjoyable. Now, like Mark, I actually did my first degree was in English, actually, but I remember my lecturers at that point saying that education, he said, is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. If you actually regard education as being some sort of punitive self-discipline, then of course, fair enough, perhaps a course like this doesn't quite work. But it was enjoyed. I think it was actually enjoyed by people. We've also believed that there is no reason why enjoyment and learning cannot be the same sort of process. And I don't want to be overly pretentious. I'm not reading my actual note here, but you can go back to the whole humanist tradition of education to look at teaching and delighting at the same time, learning that what should be beautiful should also be useful.